ever catch yourself asking, oh man, maybe I'm in too deep of being this worried genius and I've lost a bit of my
Oh, yes.
happy simpleton?
Yeah, well, I certainly experienced that when my health broke down. And the reason for that was that I not only did I get sick, my life fell apart because I couldn't do anything that I used to be able to do. I couldn't listen to music. I couldn't read. I couldn't write. I couldn't think. I couldn't do any of the, because everything that I had done was complex and difficult, all the things that I engaged in. And what I did realize was that that left me vulnerable on a certain front, because if I wasn't in peak health, let's say, I wouldn't be able to do those things. And so, I mean, that's why I'm walking now, for example. You know, I said I walk 6 miles a day, and I do that every day. And it's very simple. And I've played a lot of ping pong, and I've always liked that, but I never played that much, but I liked that. And there is some utility in having things around that are rewarding and good for you, that are less complex. I would say, though, that with regards to the conflict between, let's say, you know, miserable wisdom and happy ignorance, is that there's different forms of rewards to be found in different places. You know, you can think about this even in terms of personality. One major personality dimension is extroversion. And the reason for that is that we have a pleasure circuit, and how active that is varies between people. That's what causes variation in extroversion. And we generally equate happiness with the activation of the circuitry that's associated with extroversion. And drugs like cocaine and amphetamines activate that circuit. But there's another personality dimension, which is openness. And openness is the creativity dimension, and there's pleasure to be derived from that as well. And so that's philosophical exploration and literary experience. And I suppose when you go to a movie, you experience a blend of those two things, especially if it's a rather complex movie. So there's different forms of engagement or pleasure to be found, and some of them are more akin to happiness, and some of them are more akin to meaning. And sometimes they come into conflict, but I think all things considered, they work best when they're working together. And I do strive diligently to and I think that this has really been brought home to me. You know, look, I couldn't sit down. I literally couldn't sit down for almost a year. And so I lost the ability to sit down. I had fantasies for hours of being able to sit by a fireplace and just not move, because I had this condition called akathisia, which is, I learned how valuable it is to be able to sit down. And now when I sit down and nothing is happening, I'm taking stock of that and noticing what an unbelievable gift that is. And it is really useful to maintain your ability to see what you have that you've taken for granted, because you can lose everything. You can lose things you don't even know you have. I had no idea that you could ever lose the ability just to sit down, but you can. I wouldn't recommend it. So I'm more appreciative, I would say, of simpler things than I was. I'm more appreciative of other people than I was. I'm probably more grateful, all things considered, than I was. And hopefully that will continue developing. I have no contempt for happiness. You know, I tell people, don't pursue happiness, pursue meaning. And I think that's true. But if happiness comes along, it should be welcomed. And if you're ever somewhere where that's happening, you should notice it and be grateful for it and enjoy it. And that's for sure.
Do you think sometimes the world sets an expectation of who you are, and constant compliments? Oh my gosh, Jordan, let me tell you, you changed my life. Oh my gosh, Jordan, you don't even know what your book did to me. Oh my gosh, oh, you have no idea. Because of you, I'm doing that. Because of you, my marriage worked. Because of you, I have better relation with my dad. Because of you, I'm doing better with my mom. Because of you. Sometimes that because of you, it's a little too much burden of because of you. It's like, dude, because of me, don't do shit. Like, because of me, just let me be free for once. Like, because of you, like, maybe I don't want you to say because of you. Look, go live your life. Look, because of you, you made the decision. I'm just writing a book. Do you ever feel like you don't want that standard and expectation of, putting you on the pedestal here, and then you have to almost walk on water where you're not free. Do you ever feel that kind of an obligation, or no, that's not even something that crosses your mind?
I feel that obligation all the time.
Got it.
And I have people around right from the beginning of all this. I've talked to my friends and my family all the time about what I'm doing so that I don't make a mistake, so that we're trying to stop me from making a mistake. So, but I also, especially when I'm talking to people one-on-one, I don't want, see, if you're a clinical psychologist, you don't want to steal people's accomplishments from them, which is partly why you don't give advice exactly. So maybe someone is trying to decide whether they should get married. And maybe you have an opinion, but probably you shouldn't, because as a psychologist, let's say, because except perhaps in extreme cases, the person has to discover what they need to do for themselves so that they can discover it again in the future, so that they can learn to discover things for themselves. And you don't want to give advice, because then if they do something good, you can take credit for it. And I don't want to take credit for the accomplishments that people make as a consequence of, what would you say, putting the ideas they encounter in my books into practice. They put them into practice, and good for them. And so when I meet people in the street, that's what I tell them. It's like, okay, you did this specific thing, good for you. And, I provided some impetus, and I'm happy about that and pleased to do that. But I certainly don't want the credit. But I do feel the obligation. I think it is part of what made me ill. I think it is because, as a psychologist, I dealt with people's innermost secrets for decades. But it was kind of limited, right? It was 13 people or so a week, maybe up to 20, which is still quite a few people, but it's not an inordinate number of people. It's a bounded number of people. And then I had my other work that I could escape into, let's say, and I wasn't carrying it with me, the burden of the lives of the people that I was intertwined with. But then all of a sudden I started to experience that the longing, I suppose, in some sense, on a much greater scale, and that's been difficult to digest. The misery, and that's so common in people's lives, but even worse than that, the degree to which it requires almost nothing to rectify it in an important way. There's many people who are starving for a word of encouragement, and if you provide that, they run with it. Well, why weren't they encouraged to begin with? And that's a deep hole to fall down. And because you can never stop answering that question once you start asking it. And it has something to do with the fundamental difficulty that everyone who's human has in valuing their own existence because of its imperfections and finitude. And it's a very complex question. And then to see that played out thousands of times, these brief encounters I have with people, they're very intense. People tell me things in those encounters that they don't tell anyone else, or they tell very few people, or maybe they've never told anyone in their life. And I can see too, this young man stopped me on the street the other day, and he was looking a bit beat up. And he came up and he said, he was very shy, and he said, well, your lectures have been very helpful. And I asked him what his name was, and that usually helps people set them at ease. And then I said, well, what helped you? And he was quite hesitant. He didn't exactly know how to formulate what he was doing, but I could see that he was very scared to say anything that he had done well, because his experience had been that he'd never been encouraged when he did something well. And so, you can really punish someone if they come up to you and say they did something good that was actually good, and then you punish them or ignore them. It really hurts them. And that happens to children all the time. And it certainly had happened to this young man. So he's very hesitant to tell me what he had done that was good. And, he told me, and I listened, and I said, look, this is, as far as I'm concerned, that what you did was really good. And he just lit up, it was, and that's great that he lit up, but it's terrible that that hadn't happened to him before.